Hey, welcome again to another episode of SaaS Builders, and I'm here today with Tyler Foley to talk all about how to be a better public speaker. So for you CEOs that are and others that are wanting to be able to present, pitch, whatever better, this one is definitely one to tune into. So Tyler, can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So Tyler Foley, I'm a father, husband, author, consultant, seeker of warm beaches, and general lover of all things music and cinema.
Awesome. What a great introduction. And hey, right there, there's tip, design the most perfect introduction. So when somebody says, introduce yourself, you capture so many motivating things right there off the bat. So why don't we just start with an easy one? Tell me more about music. What do you like?
Oh, I'm one of those, I hate being one of those people, right? Where you're like, I love all music. And they're like, yeah, but do you listen to this? And then they go, no, I don't like country, and you go, but I, I actually genuinely am a lover of all things music, from jazz, jazz fusion,
Mm,
classical, country, death metal, heavy metal, rock, classic rock.
wow.
I do actually listen to all of it. It drives my wife insane. I have a very eclectic music taste. And so, depending on when or where I am or what I'm trying to do, it will dictate the music choices. When I'm doing my consulting work and if I'm having to write reports, I'll have a lot of Baroque music playing in the background and just kind of tuned out. If I'm really angry, I try to do some speed metal drumming because I'm a drummer by nature and by training. Love to drum, and speed metal is actually probably one of the hardest things to actually do and do well. It's surprisingly intricate. I actually find drumming speed metal harder than it is to drum jazz, and I love
Wow.
to drum jazz as well. So if I need to just blow off steam, then it's speed metal or heavy metal track, and just a lot of
Just
double pedal kicks, and then I get to do jazz. Jazz is my calm down. Jazz is uh my thinker. Like, if I need to work on dexterity, or if I really want to try and challenge myself, I'll get together a really good jazz riff, or try to drum along with some of the greats, and duplicate their styles as best I can, because I'm not there yet. I've been drumming now for over 30 years.
But tell me a little bit more about then, but you get to the public speaking side of things. We were talking before. I mean, it looks like on our side, we have a lot of CEOs. Sometimes they have trouble presenting or pitching their idea. Maybe what are some of the basic tips that they can follow to get better at this?
Well, so the first thing that I always encourage anybody to do is to figure out the story that best exemplifies what they're trying to pitch. Les Brown says it famously: you never tell a story without a point, and you never make a point without a story. And with most pitches, it's we're trying to get to the point, and we're trying to get to the point fast. So being able to incorporate a personal story of why something is important to you, and that personal story doesn't have to be complicated. Like, I know when I go to networking events, I have a 30-second pitch that is nailed down, and the story is very simplistic, and it goes like this: who here hates coming to these things? Who here is an introvert and can't stand having to come up with the small talk to try and then pitch your whatever to a networking group? Whether it's a product or a service. If you are one of those people who just crawls and has your skin on fire having to come to one of these things, I have a very easy to implement system that will have people come to you instead of you having to go to them. It works great for introverts so that you can stay within your comfort zone and have people just come and talk to you instead of you having to work the room. If that's something that would be helpful for you, come and talk to me over in the corner and we can sort it out. Now, it's a story. I'm telling a story, right? Who hates coming to these things? Whose skin crawls? I'm touching on all the pain points. And one of the things that I'll also do is say, I'm along with you because I am an introvert. A lot of people don't realize that, because as a public speaker, they instantly assume that I'm an extrovert, that I actually like the show and the razzle dazzle. And the opposite is the fact one of the reasons I like public speaking so much is because it actually plays to my introvert tendencies in that I don't have to small talk because I'm up on stage.
That
It's
makes
actually one
sense.
of the most isolating places that you can be, and it's beautiful because I can be alone with my own thoughts, but I can help guide an audience, and it plays to my strengths quite well. So in telling that quick story and hitting on pain points, that's how then I can have people come to me, and I already know that they're pre-qualified. I don't have to do any of the small talk, and they can say, "Tell me more about this thing," and then I can talk to them knowing that they're interested in what it is that I have to pitch, and then I'm not having to constantly work the room. So finding the story that will resonate with your audience and give them a compelling reason to come and find out more about your point of view is usually the first thing that I will work with executives, because so many people feel that sharing the personal is unprofessional, and the opposite is true. That if you can share the personal, if you can give insight into your thought process, the more trusting you seem, the more empathy and sympathy I can have with you, the more I can see your point of view, and the more likely I am to trust you, therefore buy from you. So finding those personal stories is usually the first thing that I would suggest to all executives or CEOs or anyone in a leadership or standpoint, so that they can come and find uh, their ideal audience, essentially.
Awesome, awesome tips. Well, tell me a little bit more about, maybe you mentioned personal, your backstory, even a bit. How did you mentioned you're an introvert and you fall into this public speaking thing. How did that all happen and come to be?
Well, I I fell into public speaking in a very circuitous way. I started acting when I was 6 years old. First time I was on stage, I was six. It was a Christmas play for, yeah, an elementary school Christmas pageant, and I fell in love with the stage. It was a beautiful sound to hear applause and laughter when you've done something that made people feel a way. And I've never gotten over that, and I've chased that high ever since. But I am an introvert. I don't like groups of people. I don't like having to make the small talk. I'm not comfortable in social scenarios. But the interesting thing about stage is that it's not a social scenario. You're not surrounded by strangers. Your own world. Whether I'm on stage as an actor performing a script, and I'm in a make believe world on stage, and my job is to make it come alive. It's still very structured, and it's not small talk. And so I get to perform, and I do have an exuberance and a love for performance. I love to entertain, but I get uncomfortable and awkward in social situations where I'm expected to be on or show up and entertain outside of my own script. One of the things that I like about public speaking is I get to say my own words and move people with those words. So I started on stage at a very young age, and then when I was 25, I retired from acting because at 20 years old, you know, or a 20-year career, 25 years old, that most people retire after they've been in their job for 20 years. So I felt it was time for me to move on from acting. Went and got an engineering discipline, started my own business. And in starting that business, I had to set up a safety program for it because our primary client was the government. And the business collapsed, but I had all this safety training in order to put together this safety program. And a friend of mine said, you'd actually make a pretty good safety consultant. Would you come on and be a safety manager for me? You need to get a couple other courses, but I'll pay for them. And I said, sure. And eventually I started working as this safety consultant and safety manager for various different industries. And I remember being on a large commercial project, very large industrial commercial project, multi-million dollar, almost $1 billion build. And there were a lot of executives and very a lot of stakeholders with a lot of money invested in the project that were constantly visiting. And this one day I was yelling at people, and one of the things that I'd done when I was acting was stunt work, and I specialized in high falls. So I used to jump out of 6-story windows quite regularly, into boxes and walk away to tell the tale, because there was a lot of safety and engineering that went into it. And I was watching these guys work untied up at heights, and I went off on this rant. I was like, if I could jump out of a 6-story window and live to tell the tale, you guys could work safer, because trust me, what I was doing was safer than what you're doing right now. And one of these executives from one of the high priced companies happened to be in earshot of me going off on this rant. And he came to me, he's like, is that true? I was like, absolutely. He's like, huh, well, maybe you could talk about that at our next toolbox meeting. I said, sure. So I brought it up again in the toolbox meeting, and went over all of the different things that went into making a stunt safe. And I had people eating out of the palm of my hands. I mean, it was a fascinating thing for construction guys to hear about the inside of the movie industry. And one of the other executives that happened to be on site came and he said, that was an amazing talk. Would you mind giving that as a keynote presentation at our next annual safety stand down? I said, sure. What's a keynote? Because I didn't know at the time. And so he had a chuckle and he said, well, here's, the information of my assistant, reach out, we'll coordinate the thing. And I ended up creating this talk about jumping out of windows being the safest job that I ever had. And it became very, very popular. And next thing I knew, I was public speaking. And now that became the career. And then eventually enough people would ask me, well, how do you do that? I was working with a lot of executives and a lot of C-suites types, business owners, and they would all come to me and they'd say, how are you able to so confidently take the stage and just talk? I said, well, it's easy. I said, no, you don't understand. It's not easy. I'm like, no, it really is. It's a very simple thing. It's a very easy thing to train. And they're like, oh, I'll prove it. So I started training these guys. And next thing I knew, I had an entire career, not only being a public speaker myself, but being a speaker trainer and showing executives how to confidently take the stage, how to be more engaging in their presentations. I've found that a lot of executives don't actually struggle taking the stage. They've found a comfort level being a figurehead. What they have a hard time is crafting a message that keeps people's attention or keeps them engaged. And then there are that percentage that are actually struggle with the fear of judgment, fear of public speaking. And so we work on both sides of those, getting people more confident with their messaging and then getting their messaging to a point where people want to pay attention. And that has been just a beautiful career for the last 6 years. And honestly, I can't fathom doing anything else now at this point. Like I look back at my careers, I still dabble in acting every once in a while, but it's definitely on a hobby level. But I don't know that I could go back to just safety consulting or even the jobs that I had briefly while I was acting, like an airline employee or something like that. Like I couldn't go back to the 9 to 5 because this is the most rewarding career that I've ever found. And I want to do it forever.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing your backstory, if you will. It's fascinating. And just to touch on one thing, as you brought up, I remember a story that a friend of mine, he worked at the time, it was GTE. They later became Verizon, but he was a cable installer and he was doing a very difficult install of a whole bunch of cables in Oxnard, California. He actually climbed up on a ladder, climbed up this like 3-story area, climbed up to the top of the 3-story area, over a bit to get this one cable run, like totally, definitely not safe, right? But just the only way to get this cable into place. And he was just coming back down where, you mentioned these executives come by and they're showing, how the work that's being done. And one of the guys asked, well, how'd you run that cable? And he's like, well, yeah, I shimmied up this pole, climbed up the ladder, shimmied up the pole, went over here. And they were laughing. They thought he was joking. Yeah, that industry is definitely, sometimes there are high flying folks there.
Well, and the funny thing is it comes down to risk tolerance. We all have different perceptions, especially if you've been doing that job for a long period of time, that you stop seeing the inherent risk or you become complacent with it. And then the same thing with the public speaking, or acting or performing. Like for me, I'd become very blasé and complacent with where I was at in in my craft, in career in general. And I can see that with the executives that I work with, where they get comfortable, they get into a rut, and they're like, no, I do this speech, and this is the thing that I learned from Toastmasters, and I read and I read and I read, and I go, yeah, but is that serving you, and is that serving your audience? And know that with each different audience that you have, based on the audience makeup, the delivery has to be different. So doing it the same way over and over again doesn't necessarily serve you. And same with those construction guys, right? They get so used to doing this one way that they get locked into this perception that they can't get hurt because they haven't been hurt before. And the reality is they've just gotten really, really lucky. And it's not that what they're doing is safe, it's that what they're doing hasn't come to bite them yet.
Yeah, they're rolling the dice every time. But Jed, you kind of touched on something that somebody else said, which was one of the earlier shows, which was if you're comfortable with what you're doing, well, get uncomfortable, because that's
Yeah.
the only way you're going to grow. Because if you're comfortable, you're not growing.
Yeah, a great friend of mine, Jason Krause, runs an executive consulting firm, Kraukman Industries, and he's um, ICF certified business coach. Used to work for CTI, Coaches Training International. He was their international training liaison, and he is a former Olympic bobslayer. And it's one of the things that he talks about. You're either in growth or contraction, and contraction is death. And that you don't want to get to a level of complacency or comfort, because that means that you are actually slowly dying. That the only way to be in growth is to push the limits. And he talks about lifting weights because, as an Olympian, he had to be in the gym often and do a lot of the dead weight lifting. And he was talking about when he was with his coach, he would get through a set, and the coach would be like, two more, one more, and he would push to the one more, and then the coach would say, okay, one more, and he would struggle with it, but he would finally knock it out, and then he'd come back down, and then the coach would be like, now one more, and he would try, and he would try, and he would try, and he just couldn't lift it, and the coach would have to help lift the bar up, and then he would clap him on the back and say, good, you reached failure. And he didn't understand it for a long while, but it was because if he hadn't have pushed to the point where he couldn't push anymore, he wouldn't have known what his limitation was. But because his coach said 12 and he was able to knock off 12, now try 13. He was able to get to 13, now try 14, and he couldn't quite push out the 14th. So 14 was now the metric. And when he could do the metric at that weight, you either increase the weight or you increase the reps, or both. And it pushes you outside of your comfort zone. And subsequently, he got stronger, he got bigger, he got, as a bobslayer, he wanted to have the most weight and mass on him that he could to propel this. But, highly trained, right? And that's the thing about risk tolerance, is that the higher a level of training that you have, the more you can mitigate the risks that you are there. I mean, you look at astronauts going into space, everything wants to kill them. They are strapped to an explosive device going miles into the air, into a vacuum. At any given moment, their entire environment wants them to die. But they can do it, and they can do it safely and successfully, because of the amount of training that goes into it, because of the amount of engineering and redundancy that goes into it. They are highly, highly, highly trained to react to every possible scenario. I mean, they do years of training on the ground before they ever get into the air. Same with pilots, and same with any other risk inherent industry. There is a lot of training that goes behind it, and it highlights the importance of training to get to a comfort level. Same with public speaking. People who are uncomfortable public speaking, they just need to get out and do it. I think of Jason trying to build muscles, or even myself. If I wanted six-pack abs, I can't sit on the couch and watch exercise videos and expect to have the ripped bod like I'm going into a Marvel universe. I need to actually start doing sit-ups if I want to see six-pack abs. And same with anything else. If you want to be more comfortable with something, you have to do that thing until you find the comfort in it. And then, as we've discussed, then you need to push your boundaries. If you're comfortable speaking in a boardroom, try speaking in a conference. If you're comfortable speaking in a conference of 200, try 1,000. Always push those boundaries. If you're comfortable speaking that way, go for the keynote presentation. Start to charge for your services. There's always room to grow in any arena, public speaking or otherwise.
Amazing, amazing advice, Tyler. So I really appreciate you having being on the show. And any final thoughts or quotes you'd like to share?
Yeah. So back to, initially telling a story. It's a hard thing for people to understand, but the more specific your story can be, the more universal it will resonate. And that's a lesson that I learned working with Bo Eason. And I found it to be true time and time and time again. And one of the best ways to be specific within your story is to tell the thing that you're afraid to say. Because often the thing that you're afraid to say is what your audience needs to hear. And this goes, and true leadership has the ability to be vulnerable and still lead. And one of the best ways that you can lead is admit that you don't have all the answers. You may know where you're trying to get to. You may know the path you want to follow, but you still need help getting there. I think of the great explorers. Sir Hilary Edmond, first time he got to the top of Everest. He may have been the first man recorded to get to the top of that peak, but he didn't do it alone. He mapped the path that he wanted to go, but then he needed people to portage and carry stuff. He had Sherpas that brought him almost all the way to the top.
Yeah.
And ever since, every other person who has summited that mountain has done it not alone, but with help. And true leaders can recognize where their weaknesses are and know that they are not going to get there alone. Roger Bannister didn't break the 4-minute mile on his own. He had a team of 3 other guys that would pace him so that he could propel himself forward and break the 4-minute mile. And when he did it, he was the first human ever recorded to do it. And at the time, it was deemed impossible. And now high school students do it. You know what I mean? He was an elite level athlete, and now a high schooler can do it. I've run a 4-minute mile. And so when it comes to being a good leader, recognize that it's okay to ask for help. And in fact, it's a sign of strength, not of weakness. And when you're telling your personal story, don't be afraid to get detailed, and don't be afraid to say the thing that you're afraid to say, because you'd be surprised at how much that instills trust within the group that you're speaking with. You'll find camaraderie, you'll find support. And a lot of times people will want to back you even more, because no one's perfect. And the people who are able to admit their flaws or admit their areas of improvement, they're the ones who go furthest. And so I would encourage anybody to say the thing that you're afraid to say.
Awesome, Tyler. Really great having you, and it's been a terrific show. If people want to reach you, how do they do it?
Best place to reach me is SeanTylerFoley.com. Sean is spelled the proper Irish way, SeanTylerFoley. So Sean like Sean Connery. SeanTylerFoley.com, and they can get every way to connect with me there. I have all my socials up there, all of the trainings, live training events that we have going on, they can find there. Any one of your guests who goes there, Jefferson, if they want, they can download a free giveaway that I have for all of your listeners called The Method. It's an 11-page document that contains 5 insider secrets for better public speaking that I've learned over 35 years of performance. So that's my gift to them, for anybody who wants to go there. Anybody who's listening on Code Warriors or any of your other shows for that matter, they're more than welcome to go over, get that free gift. And it would be my honor and pleasure to help serve them in any way that I can.
Awesome, Tyler. Really great having you. And hopefully after 6 months or so, it'd be great to check in with you again. So
it would be my joy and my pleasure. I would love to come back on.